You're listening to the Wrestling Change My Life podcast. Enjoy the show.
We can endure anything and adapt and pivot and change. Wrestling gave us that ability.
I would say nothing in life has impacted me more than the things wrestling has taught me in terms of self-reflection, resilience.
Toughness. Some guys have it, some guys don't.
Adversity, 100%. How to pick myself up and be a man after I failed.
And everything that has shaped my life and where I'm at today would not be there without the values and basically the lessons I've learned through the sport of wrestling.
For me, wrestling saved my life because it allowed me to focus and channel my energy.
We're fortunate if you wrestled, because if you wrestled, natural talent helps, but it's 5% of the ingredient. It pales in comparison to heart and technique and effort.
It humbled me, taught me humility. Nothing can humble you more than wrestling. I think it's the learning to adapt, right? You learn how to adapt, you learn how to solve problems.
You know, if I look back at my time I spent wrestling, if they gave me one thing more than anything else, it's mental toughness.
We've done it. Welcome back. Let's get going with this one, folks. I have a great guest today. You're listening to Wrestling Change My Life. My guest is Coach O, John Oostendorp, who is the head coach at College, one of the premier Division III programs in the country. And you've never seen a culture like the College team. These guys, year in and year out, are consistent, battling with the top guys in Division III. Before being the head coach at Coach Oostendorp wrestled for Gable under those early 90s teams that it's considered the new era. When he was a junior, Iowa had 7 guys ranked number 1 in the country at one point. And Coach O was a 2-time All-American there. He was a world team member in 95, and it's just battled with some of the best wrestling has to offer. And he's an awesome guy, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. My fan of the week goes to Jordan Westfall, who was a teammate of my brother Tanner's at and we certainly appreciate you listening, Jordan. Thank you all so much. Big shout out to my guys, Clayton Rush, Ethan Ball. Enjoy this episode with Coach O as we take you to Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Coach O, welcome to the podcast, my friend. How are you?
Hey, Ryan, doing well. I'm doing well. All of our freshmen just came in this Saturday and getting ready for another season, and I'm glad to be talking to you here.
Man, well, it's an honor. And I know when you say that the freshmen just came in, for the listeners who might not know, you're the head coach at College, Division III powerhouse, one of the most unique cultures I've ever been around in my time in wrestling. So that's exciting. And I know just from knowing you and listening to some interviews with you, you're really big on kind of the personal relationships you have with your wrestlers, and that's something you picked up from Gable. So if we go back in time to maybe like the senior year, your high school senior year, kind of talk us through how you got to the University of Iowa and what your first experiences with Coach Gable were.
Honestly, it's kind of a unique situation. Mitch Kelly, who I have the utmost respect for, came to our school, and he wrestled Iowa and was really close with Coach Gable. He came to our school and student taught, and actually worked with me a lot, him and Coach Cool, who was my high school coach my senior year. And really through him, he had a connection with Coach Gable. And, I had always thought I was going to go on and play football in college. And it ended up right at the end there. I wasn't offered a D1 scholarship, but I was offered a UNI. And actually the night before I was going to sign my football scholarship at UNI, Coach Gable and Coach Johnson came down. I ended up signing a wrestling scholarship to wrestle in Iowa.
Man, that is, I've heard another story where Coach Gable kind of showed up at the 11th hour like that. Royce Alger told that story where he was going to sign with UNI and they kind of showed up and Gable just was like, I'm going to sit in your bedroom and you make the decision. It
was more of a case. I kind of grew. Like each year, I wrestled 145 in high school, then 165, and then 185, and then basically 210 my senior year. And the recruiting process, I was weighing probably 185 pounds going into my after my junior year, and then I gained another 20 pounds my senior year. So, at like when I was at state track or even that fall, Mike Stoops was a football coach at Iowa, a young GA. He would come over and actually watch wrestling practice, with the intention that after my freshman year, I was going to go out for football. But it was just, wrestling for Iowa. It was such a commitment to do it then. And I actually ended up doing it 2 years later, going into my junior year. And then they put me on football scholarship my senior year. So I ended up playing football and wrestling, doing both my last 2 years at Iowa. But yeah, it's kind of interesting how things can change where you think you're going to do one sport and it's pretty hard to turn down Coach Gable and getting to wrestle for him and the University of Iowa wrestling. So.
Well, and, Mark Johnson is a legend where I'm from, the Quad Cities. So he's been on the show, and I really just love Mark Johnson. And it's crazy to say he's not well known, but maybe now for some of the guys who are coming up, they don't know that he was there for 12 years, was an Olympian in his own right. Is that how you got into Greco, through Coach Johnson?
Yes, I did. And to talk about Coach Johnson, I don't think there's anyone that I could have in a higher esteem as Coach Johnson. He was just such a impressive guy, impressive person, and he was such a figure. You had Coach Gable, who was a head coach, but from my upper weight standpoint, Coach Johnson, I was equally as close with him, and just an all-around impressive person. I feel incredibly fortunate to be able to be coached by Coach Gable and Coach Johnson. And Coach Johnson was there my first 2 years, and then went to Oregon State after that. So.
Yeah, and people don't know that when he went to Oregon State, they were last in the Pac-12 his first year there. His second year there, they bring in Les Gutches. I think they won the Pac-12 and made a pretty good showing at the Nationals. Then he went to Illinois, and then built a dynasty there. But that's a guy where, man, he just seems to do the right thing all the time. And we've all seen that picture when he's in that red singlet, how jacked that dude was. He must have been pretty tough to go.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, when you would wrestle him, he would just put you on lockdown. You felt pretty helpless. I remember one Saturday, we'd have Saturday morning football games, and I was a true freshman. He and I were pretty close, and he was my upper weight coach, and there'd get to be 200 or 300 people come in and watch practice. And before we started one of our live goes, we were getting ready to shake hands, and I look over and I say, "Hey, coach, who is that over there?" And he looked over, and I freight train doubled him to start. I knew I was going to at least get one takedown in, and then I don't think I got off the bottom for the next 45 minutes. But yeah, he was a lot of fun, just a great mentor and figure.
So
I have a ton of respect for him today.
Oh, man, he's awesome. And he just gets you fired up talking to him. He still has that intensity. Now, when you were a freshman, was the spring of 87 your freshman year, or was the spring of 88 your freshman year?
Spring of 88 was my redshirt freshman year.
Okay,
yep.
So I'm also doing a podcast documentary on Gable, and that 86-87 season's been really interesting. So, everyone knows that in 87 they were going for 10 in a row. Penn was up by 1, gets splayed by Kelly, and they lose to Iowa State. And then Iowa goes on a 4-year streak of not winning. And they got second 3 times, but then they got sixth 1 year. So it's kind of like the only years you can point to that would be considered a drought, so to speak, even though they were really high up every year. But then when you were there, your last couple of years, they had one of the best teams ever in 91-92, where 7 guys were ranked number 1 that year. Talk about what was it like to kind of witness the change from your first 3 years where you guys weren't winning to when you were back on top. Was it noticeable, or was it just some kind of progression that happened naturally?
When I came in, my redshirt freshman year, we did not win it, and my true freshman year, we didn't win it. My freshman year, we didn't win it, and then my sophomore, junior, senior year, that's when we went on that roll again, and they won those 6 or 7 in a row again. Mm-hmm. But I can remember, and Coach talked about culture all the time. When I came in as a true freshman, and I actually remember the spring before that, I came in to lift weights. I'd already committed there, and I came in to lift weights, and it was, I think, a week after the national tournament. And Coach Gable, I'll never forget it, he was standing by his locker there, and he is the most, I mean, he was an incredibly driven person. And I can remember him, how riled up he was, and he was yelling, and he goes, and he was not going to stand for them not being national champions. And that's what made him, of all the things that made, I mean, there was a lot of different things that made him a great coach. He was incredibly driven, but he was observant. He would recognize things and he would attack them to fix them. And he was adaptable. And that's one thing that I think the great coaches, they think one way, but they're athletes. Not everybody thinks the way you do. Otherwise, it'd be easy to coach. And I think he was so good at adapting his philosophy to working with 30 different individuals. And that's what, I mean, he was driven, but I think there's other driven people out there. Now, he's pretty extremely driven, but I think he was so good at reading his athletes. But I remember him when I walked in there to change to go in the locker room, he was ranting and raving and talking to me, and he was already coaching me before I ever stepped in the room, really. And he had such a presence. But,
wow.
Even as good as they were, there was a 4-year drought, but he got it fixed, and he fixed the culture, and then they went on another run. And that's what's so impressive is he was able to get it back and keep it there. That's
what I keep thinking is he would have been one of the best wrestling coaches of all time if he had only won those 9 straight. But the fact that he won another 6 after that, and if you consider, besides 90, Iowa won every national title from 91 through 2000. And those 3 years when Zaleski won, a lot of those guys were Gable guys too. So, I mean, there's no question that he had a huge impact on dominating college wrestling in the 80s and the 90s. But I think one of the things that gets overshadowed is Coach Gable's ability to have individual relationships with the guys. And this is something that all of your wrestlers tell me. You do the same thing. Like, you have a really unique ability to develop personal relationships with the guys so that they don't feel judged and that they can be open around you. And I think during kind of when I was coming up, people thought of Iowa as just go hard, and you didn't really hear about those personal connections. So, like, how have you learned from Coach Gable on developing those relationships and applying that to your own game as a coach?
Well, just looking at Coach Gable, I mean, he drove us, and he drove us incredibly hard, but you always felt like he had your back, and he was, as much as he pushed us, I mean, I think almost to a T, all of us love him and would, and that's what he built, that relationship. And it was a tough relationship, but there was such a connection to him, and that he was looking out for us, and he wanted us to help reach his goals. And you saw how driven he was and how committed he was to reaching our goals. But he had a compassion to him that made him extremely effective, I think. And he's just kind of a unique guy. I mean, he had a personality that he didn't have to say a lot, and it would mean a lot. I remember one time I went, and I was a true freshman, and we had a tough wrestling workout, and I went in and lifted the next morning, and he saw me, and he goes, "Oostendorp," he goes, "after that workout, you're in here lifting today?" He goes, he just shook his head and he walked out, and I could tell he was impressed. And that made me, I mean, that was his way of motivating me. And from then on, you just wanted to always be in the weight room. And he had the benefit of being a living legend coaching you, but still it wasn't, I mean, he was on a daily basis, was just, he doesn't get credit for how compassionate and smart and intelligent and observant he was. It's not all about being driven. I think there's a lot of driven people, but he was incredibly intelligent and genuine and compassionate.
Man, that's a great story. And that's probably a story where back in the time that stuck with you all day. Like, just those few words he said.
Yeah. Because he did, he wasn't a cheerleader type coach. He would push you and push you. But when he would say something that I remember to this day, like, certain things he said to me and how it affected me. And he was, but he was adaptable too. I mean, he would take all different kind of backgrounds or different styles or philosophies, and he would get the most out of them. And that's what probably, he realized not everybody thought the way he did. And he was ahead of his time. We would do like 2-hour practices, probably maybe 2 hours and 15 minutes. And we would do a lot of live wrestling. And I, as a light heavyweight, I was probably 230 pounds, but by the middle of January, my weight, I would lose some weight. I would lose quite a bit of weight and probably, probably lose some of my pop and explosion. Where a lot of our guys were cutting a lot of weight, the brands, those guys were cutting maybe 20 pounds. And, when they would have those long workouts, it would probably help them, because it helped those guys burn down their weight and stay, help them make weight. Well, one time, middle of January, I was wrestling Wayne Cole. Might have been my sophomore year. And he was a high level wrestler. He was wrestling freestyle. And it was middle of January and the grind of the season, the 2-a-days, and he was just taking it to me. And then I wrestled him again in the spring, where after I was lifting with football for maybe make a long story short, I wasn't on the mat for probably 2 months and just lifting and lifting and lifting. And I wrestled him and maybe took him down 7 times to 0. And Coach Gable saw that one thing. And from that time forward, he recognized it. And this was before overtraining was ever even thought about. He'd be like, Oostendorp, I want you to go lift weights today. Or about once a week, you do that. Oostendorp, I want you to go hunting today. He knew I needed sometimes to get away from it. And that was 30 years ago, 25 years ago. So, he wasn't just push it. I mean, he pushed us, but he was smart about it. He understood people and he understood how to motivate people. And he's just ahead of his time. He's such a unique individual. And that's why you don't see people win 9 national championships and then go on another run of 7. He almost always made the right call on those individuals, and that's how he could get them to perform under duress.
Man, that's amazing that he recognized that. It just, it's a little detail that most people would probably go unnoticed on.
Yeah.
He picked it up and filed it away and used it.
One workout in June at a summer camp, he saw it. And he's like, okay, that's the guy that middle of January was having trouble, competing with Wayne.
Right.
And 2.5 months later of lifting and being off the mat, he took him down like 7 times in a row. And from that point forward, it was different. And that's what, that's it. He was ahead of his time in that era.
No question. Now, you were a 4-time national qualifier. You had also made a couple junior Greco World teams, and I think even won a world title during your first couple of years there. And then your junior and senior year, you placed twice. What was kind of the transition point for you to make that switch from contender to a guy who's competing with the Kurt Angles of the world? And like, what was that transition point for you?
I would say, honestly, my freshman year, my redshirt freshman year, at one time I was like 24-1, and the guy that I lost to early in the year, I had beat from Minnesota. I lost to him in the Northern Open. It used to be a big preseason tournament. I had beat him like 14-7 in the duel. So basically, I had beat everybody my freshman year, and we went down to Oklahoma State. And I wrestled Kurt Maiman, who ended up being a 4-time All-American. And I beat him like 6-3, but I popped my knee. I popped my LCL. I think we had maybe 3 weeks before Big Tens, and we wrestled Big Tens. And I think I was in the quarters, and I was wrestling a Wisconsin kid, and it was like 14-1. I wanted to tech him, so maybe 20 seconds left. I hit like a duck, and I almost hit it too far over and got ran over, and I popped my MCL, which they're a little more debilitating than an LCL. And that was, 2 weeks before nationals. So, I went out in the semifinals against a guy. I think he was the Holman's older brother, and he was ranked like 9th. Kind of went out and just threw a body lock. I knew I was hurting. I threw a body lock and pinned him. And then I tried to wrestle in the finals against Llewellyn, who he's a tough wrestler. And, just was not mobile. And he beat me in the Big Ten finals bad. But then I had 2 more weeks to try to get healthy for nationals. Ended up getting beat in the quarters by Maiman. and then got beat in the blood round. And, it was probably not the 2 weeks prior to there where I couldn't wrestle, but probably the 5 or 6 weeks from Oklahoma State till nationals. I lost a little conditioning. I lost a little mobility. So I went in at a 4 seed and ended up not placing. The guy from Penn State who was in the finals, I beat like 13-6 during the year. So I was more of those where I was there. It was there for the taking, and I didn't get it done my freshman year. And it was one of the one times where I ever really, it bothered me, and I allowed my national tournament to affect some of my spring and my summer, and I started missing football a little bit, and I allowed just some probably feeling sorry for myself a little bit and some negativity maybe just because I didn't reach my goal just affect me, my summer training, or even into my sophomore year. And looking back now as a coach, I see it. You got to be able to get over it, and it's one of the one times where I was just down. I was really down. And at Iowa, hey, when you're winning, it's great. You're the toast of the town. But not being an All-American, and my freshman year, I remember I was lifting, and they were taking kids. I was lifting. It was like midday. They were taking kids through the wrestling room, showing them like wrestling, and there's probably like 8 or 9 year olds, and Coach Gable was bringing them in there, and I was benching, and one of the kids, he goes, "Hey, this is Coach Oostendorp, or this is John Oostendorp, our heavyweight." And one of the kids, I'll never forget it, he goes, "My dad said you choked." and yeah, no, I remember that. And Coach Gable's like, "Oh no, he had a great year, but that's one little thing, but it was like, that was kind of where my mind was, and I didn't reach my goal, and there was a lot of work you put into it, and I kind of let myself probably feel sorry for myself some, and just didn't train with the hunger, the intensity, or I was just kind of down, I guess, depressed maybe a little bit, and it affects some of my training, and my sophomore year, I think I got beat in the blood round. I think I was like 27-11 maybe, or 28-11. But I had kind of an area where I had some down matches and started coming out of it at nationals and ended up getting beat like in a close one, I think, to Maiman from Oklahoma State. So yeah. And so, that's 2 years and I wasn't All-American and felt like it was attainable, but,
so
then I kind of broke through on my junior year.
Yeah. But at that point, though, you're falling short. By anyone else's standards, you're having some pretty good seasons. But at that point, did Gable step in and say, "Okay, maybe you should play football just to kind of relax a little bit," or how did that all transpire?
I tried to do it. I tried to do it after my freshman year, and he wouldn't let me. And then after my sophomore year, and that's credit to Coach Gable, I went to him and he embraced it. And that's where, that's when I started lifting with football and went out my junior year. And I think not only being able to do football, took away me missing it, but it also, just made me even appreciate wrestling more maybe. Then I had my junior year, I took 5th, and then my senior year I took 3rd. So
beating Rulon Gardner, let's not downplay it. Beating Rulon Gardner for 3rd.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that's right. We had a pretty good match there.
So then you graduate. You're teammates with some legends: Tom and Terry Brands, the Steiners, Chad. Is it Zappatel, and then Bart Cheselvin?
Yep, Zappel.
I think I read at one point the 91-92 season, you guys had 7 guys ranked number 1 at one point, and that's just
it was pretty loaded. I think that in Big Tens that year we might have had, was it 8 or 9 in the finals? I think.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. That was a pretty loaded team.
Loaded, and then you go on to be part of the Hawkeye Wrestling Club. You make the World Championship team in '95, so you made the national team in '95. Now, was that at heavyweight or 220? Because I couldn't really figure it out.
That was at 220. My 94 through 96, the weight was 220, and then my last 2 years they dropped it down to 211. So
gotcha. And then in 96, you win the U.S. Open and come a match short of making the Olympic team, which I know I've heard interviews is obviously a tough time for anyone. But more importantly, you've gone on to impact so many lives through college. I think it would have been a shame if you didn't end up as the head coach there. So, like, looking back on 96, what do you take from that to help your athletes now as a coach?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was a tough lesson to learn, but looking back, I know exactly looking back now, I can see exactly what happened. You pull on your past experiences. So, that's, I think history is one of our greatest teachers, and you pull on your past experiences and try to, I think as a head coach, you try to stop things before they become issues, or you'll start seeing things in individuals before it becomes an issue. You try to address it, or, as a coach, I say my number one job is to erase the doubt in our athletes. And you do that from training, you do it from preparation, you do it from, and I remember Coach Gable did this, and he had this ingrained in us, where I remember we had a recruit come on campus, and we were talking to him. He said, well, it's Iowa. And then he said a couple other schools in the Big Ten. And I can remember sitting there thinking, we were at sports com, I remember thinking to myself, crystal clear, why would you ever go to those other schools? Like, why would you not go here? And that was part of what Coach Gable had ingrained with us, that we're in the best environment. We're out training people. We're out lifting them. We're out toughing them. And that's a big part of wrestling, is getting your athletes to believe in themselves and your system and your program. But I remember to a T that I remember thinking, he was a heavyweight too, and I remember thinking, well, God, why would he not go here?
Right. And that was just a testament to the belief he instilled in you guys as a coach. And I know when you were at one of my good friends, Clayton Rush, came in as a highly touted recruit. I think he was third his freshman year. Then his sophomore year, he got fifth. And he went on to win 2 national titles his junior and senior year. But that's probably a kind of a similar situation as what you had when you were an athlete, because, Clayton tells him he just needed to get away from it. So I don't know if you remember that season at all when Clayton got fifth. I mean, or kind of how you applied those lessons to his game, because it seems pretty similar to maybe putting too much pressure on yourself or taking it too seriously. And I've heard you talk about the trials of 96, and it sounds kind of similar to that. So just wondering if any parallels there.
Yeah, well, here's the thing with Clayton is he's tough enough and proud enough. He wouldn't have told you that he tore his shoulder the first match of the year. This is where Clayton gets some of his toughness. First match of the year, he wrestles the guy, and the guy ends up winning the junior college national championship this year. But Clayton has an underhook, and he rips to a front headlock, and I see him kind of like move his shoulder afterwards. I was like, something happened to his shoulder there. The first match of the year, he tore his labrum, and he wrestled the entire year with the labrum. And that's probably a lot to do with him placing fifth. But I called his mom and I said, well, hey, Gail, Clayton tore his shoulder, tore his labrum. The trainer said we might need to get it checked out and possible surgery. And she told me right there, she goes, well, I'll tell you this, surgery's not an option, so he's going to go with it. And sure enough, he ran the entire season with it, wrestled every match, and just a great competitor. But Gail wasn't having any of the surgeries. So, man. In that definitely, yeah. Clayton. I mean, Clayton was his freshman year. He's in the finals and hit a shot. Sat for a second. He was actually up 5-0 at that point. Guy cut the corner and put a cradle on. But yeah, he was a great competitor for us.
Great competitor.
But there are you do need to read your athletes, and I think especially now in the time of specialization, there's times they need to get away, and that's why you need to know some of them need to be away more than others, and some of them like to be on the mat almost all the time. And that's kind of what I said where, Coach Gable, he realized I need to be off the mat, maybe just a day a week. And back then we probably did go 6-7 days a week a lot of the time. But, and that's probably the thing I take most from Coach Gable is you have a team, but you have a team of individuals. And I think he was so good at adapting, recognizing that, and not allowing his fanatical training mindset to put that on every other athlete because they wouldn't probably flourish in that environment. But there's no doubt about it. You do have to have a foundation of work and discipline and sacrifice to be those championship teams. But you have to be, and it goes back to where we talked about and why I love coaching the most is just getting to know your athletes, developing relationships where you know them. I mean, Coach Gable knew what I needed more than I thought he knew me better than I knew myself at times looking back. And that's what made him so special as a coach.
And how do you kind of apply that to build this incredible culture you have now at Co? Because I've never seen a program such as Co where everyone's so close and it's like a family. And like you're probably thinking, well, maybe you're too humble to admit this, but like, how do you do that? Or like, what are some of the things you try to do to build that culture? Because it's such a unique place at Co.
You know what? Number one thing is, and we try to preach that, and we try to talk about taking pride in your family, our wrestling family. But a big part is we really don't mass recruit people. We look for people who we think are going to come in and be, help us reach our goals and what they are. So we bring in people who we think are good people, who are committed, that wrestling is important. And I also have, I've been able to keep around some of my assistants that are extremely bright, motivated, and just great people, great mentors. Some of my assistants have been with me, 15, 16, 17 years. And they're doing it because they love the program and they love working with our athletes, because I'm definitely not paying them what they deserve to be paid. But I think, and another thing in our system is, hey, we all of us coaches have our strengths, and we tried. Everybody has a role, and it's kind of part of a family, and you just buy into it, and I'm glad that they feel strongly about our program after 4 years.
I think that's a key part, though, is not just recruiting a guy to tell your buddies, hey, I got this 4-time state placer, kind of like just getting a guy to brag about it versus, hey, I got a guy that qualified 4 times. He's really got this mentality that I like. And that's a key part of it. I never even thought about that.
Yeah, you really need to recruit a person's attitude and mindset as much as you do the talent, because some people struggle when they get in college and they haven't had to go through a lot of adversity. You take a college room and it's basically the top 1 or 2 high school kids off each team go on and wrestle college. So you'll have a college room, and even in that college room, there's different levels of commitment. And we talk a lot in our program about lifting people up. Like 2008 through 14, we were top 5 in the nation 5 or 6 years. And only one time of those years had we had a transfer in the lineup. And I think it was one time of those teams that placed in the top 5. And most of them were 4th or 3rds. So we feel like our system, when we find the right young men and we plug them in and they buy into it, it's effective. And that's why I feel so good about right now. We have a lot of high level kids that are coming in this year. I think every one of them were a state qualifier, and like 15 of them were multiple state placers but the thing is, the reason they've been successful, it wasn't their credentials, it's the type of people they are and their attitudes. And through the recruiting process, you get to know that. And when you are a family, you really interact, and everybody influences everybody else around them, and that's what has me so excited about where we're at right now with our program. We feel like we're in a position to go on a big run here. But again, talk's cheap, it's something. Actions speak louder than words, but by what I'm seeing right now, I'm pretty excited.
Well, and you got this new room that's state-of-the-art wrestling facility. How did all that come about?
They had been talking about a new athletic facility for a number of years, and then it really, in the last 4 or 5 years, it really become it really got serious about the talk and the planning stages, and And we've had alum who's been very generous to our program and and he really stepped up with a lead donation, and it's, we're very fortunate here. And probably, not only do we have great facilities, but our offices are right down here where you're just having daily interaction with your athletes, and that's what it's about. It's about you're managing your athletes. That's a big part of when they go away to college for the first time. They're going to need some support and structure, and some guys need more structure than others, and we try to make sure we provide that.
And for the folks who haven't seen this, just Google the College Wrestling Facility. It's unbelievable. 3 full mats. It's just awesome. And as we move into some more kind of rapid fire questions, they don't have to be rapid responses, so to speak, but these are just kind of more pointed questions we've got from some of the listeners. The first one, this is just selfishly, I'd love to hear your opinion on this, because everyone who thinks they're a high performer or that they give it all, they're going to go through setbacks, right? Maybe it's a setback with a girlfriend. Maybe it's in your professional life with you didn't hit your sales number or whatever it is. And, we've talked about some of the ones you've gone through. Like, what would your advice be to someone who is kind of putting themselves out there every day, but just isn't getting it done? Like, how to get over that hump and kind of get back on the track? Like, if you look at how you responded in 96 or how Terry Brands responded after losing to Kelber, like, what are some common characteristics of folks who are able to get back going after they've experienced a setback?
Obviously, a setback can be tough, and there's different degrees of that. But one thing we talk about our wrestlers is I really try to push this, is you need to take pride in every day's little accomplishments. And by that, I mean, hey, getting up early, getting your body going, getting working, you just feel good about yourself. It's like a natural high, whether you're getting a workout in, you're getting up and you're being effective in the office or at work. And we talk a lot about being, taking pride in how you address the day. And that's no different. In the great ones, here's the great ones. When you're doing sprints, you almost become a prisoner of your work ethic. When you're doing sprints, I talk about our guys doing sprints. When you want to be great, you're the guy that you feel guilty if you take one off. That's the kind of stuff that we really, and different people, it helps a ton when you surround yourself with people that are like-minded. And that's why I feel great about right now. For 2008 through 14, we were top 6 out of 7 years. And I feel like with our upperclassmen and our incoming freshmen that we're in position to have that kind of environment where you benefit from those around you. You surround yourself with people that elevate your standards. And it's human nature to not push that hard. But when you get enough people on the right track, you can do some great things and you can make history. And
day by day is kind of the theme there. And it's refreshing to hear that, because it means you can get some momentum going today, right? It doesn't have to be something that's 4 or 5 months out. Like, if you take pride in today, you can get it going right away.
Absolutely. Hey, if somebody oversleeps from a lifting workout in the morning and I see them in the hallway, what do they feel like when they look at me? And that's why when you start doing things right, you feel different about yourself. And when you get on board, you have that sense of accomplishment, whether it's a job, whether it's in your classroom, in the more people you can surround yourself. And that's what we talk about, being winners. And a winner isn't just about the performance. It's about how you approach things. We've had guys in our program that have not been starters, and their legacy as far as being talked about. And so what about so-and-so? It's when you say someone in your program, people think about that person and they have a certain mindset about him. And we've had people that weren't even starters that were some of the best leaders in our program and most impactful.
I love hearing people talk about this, and that's why I wanted to ask. And that was just a question I wanted to selfishly ask, because I think it's interesting how people handle that, because not everyone feels good every day, but you need to still do the things that you need to be successful every day. So I'm always curious to hear how high performers answer that question. Tom Ryan says something very similar. It's just about kind of winning the day, so to speak. And now you talk about people who are really driven and disciplined. One guy who's come into your program in the last couple of years is Larry Lee, Spencer Lee's dad. How did all that transpire, and what have you learned from him over the past couple of years? He seems like a very driven person as well.
Yes, he's extremely driven. And whatever he has in front of him, and it'd probably be like Coach Gable in wrestling, he attacks it until he feels good about it, and he has it fixed. And that's like, if I have something, I go to him about, I will get an email before the end of the day, no matter how busy he is. And he's a man of action. He gets things done, and he's been great to have here at Co, and has been very supportive of the wrestling program. Obviously, he's a big wrestling fan, and he's an extremely driven individual.
And is he the athletic director for Co?
He is a vice president in charge of athletics, food service, and res life. So,
gotcha.
3 things that affect our athletes, he has a direct impact in.
Man, you got to know the guy's an animal. He's a go-getter. And obviously he's passed that down to his kid, but I just love people who are driven like that. Another guy who definitely fits that bill, Steve Mocco. I heard from a number of the guys, Ethan Ball, my brother, Clayton Rush, that you've had some encounters with the Bear. What was that like? What do you remember from those guys?
They were miserable. No, they were. Well, I beat Coach in. I was a full-time coach up here at that time, and Coach Brands would call me. Tom Brands would call me. He'd be like, "Hey, we could use you down here to work out tonight." And the last thing I wanted to do was drive down at 7:00 and wrestle Steve Mocco, but I couldn't say no to Coach Brands, and Steve, he's as intense as they come, but he's a great guy, and I got to know him, and it was hard to say no to Coach Brands, but also I liked helping Steve. But yeah, that was a miserable workout. And at that point, I was still competing internationally, Greco-Roman, but I was probably, it was the one time where I couldn't train like I really needed to train because I was doing a full-time job. But yeah, luckily Coach Brands made them more shorter goes when we'd go, but man, he was about 285 pounds of just coming at you. And he'd be like Mark Ironside, except he was 280 pounds of attacking you. He's a pretty tough guy.
Was he a freshman at that time?
He might have been I think it was after. It might have been his freshman, maybe his second year. Okay.
It's ironic because you kind of remind me of a Tommy Rowland's build and style, which that was his main competitor at that time. And Rowland's actually did go down in the international circuit to 205 or 210, whatever it was. So that's interesting that you kind of fit that bill. And just the last thing on Mocco is like, yeah, a lot of guys go hard, a lot of guys hand fight hard, but like, what do you think was unique about that? I'm sure you've gone with a lot of guys since then, but outside of his skill
I have.
level.
The biggest thing with Steve was just the incredible amount of pressure he put on you. And there's certain guys that can wrestle like that type of that, like an Ironside, or the Brands were like that, or Swab. He would put a ton of pressure on you, but there's very few guys that were 285 pounds that would put that kind of pressure on you. Of all my times of wrestling, it'd be like Royce Alger. He was he was probably one of the, if you just like the toughest guys just physically to wrestle. He might have weighed 200 pounds, but he would come at you and he was just mean and tough, and you were in for a war. Now Steve Mocco was 285 pounds. He didn't do that. So he would, and again, I wasn't training like at the top of my shape, but he would put an incredible amount of pressure on you. That's what made him who he was and so successful.
I forgot.
And then people look at people's minds, or they look at like just an athletically, the mind, different people's minds can have different, there's different levels of what they're able to, depths they're able to go. And a guy like an Alger, a guy like an Ironside or Mocco, those guys, their strength was their mind and how much pressure they could put on and how much they could push themselves. And that's what Steve was, and he was 285 pounds, and it was miserable.
Oh man! And he had like the.
I think we'd about every time we'd wrestle, we'd get into it. Luckily, Brands would stop it because I don't think
like an actual.
I don't think I could go as long as he
scrap?
could at that time. They were always open hands, but they would that would happen.
Man,
one time we were doing it, and he picked me up on a double leg, and I knew he had some compassion because I was one of the one times wrestling. I was probably 6 feet in the air, and I thought he was going to pile drive me because we were fighting right before that, and he didn't pile drive me anyway. So
man, he had some heart in him. I wonder who he would go with during the year if you weren't there. I mean, who would even be able to handle him?
At that time Fuller was injured and Fulsis was injured, and I don't think many people wanted to go with him. I know West Hand was there, so he'd wrestle him, but that was one guy, so it's probably why I was coming down and wrestling him some.
And I forget that you were there when Royce Alger was there at the beginning. Like, that's a guy who you hear a lot of crazy stories about, but the one thing that sticks out to you was his mind. I mean, anything else about Royce? Any stories? I mean, before we sign off here, because I think that's a really fascinating character.
Royce made the room fun, and that's one thing about wrestling. Wrestling's a grind. The middle of January, middle of February, and he was one of the biggest characters there were, and he made it fun. I loved having those guys around there like Royce.
I love it, man.
And they backed it up with toughness, though. Those guys, I mean, they were tough guys back there with him and the Randalls and those guys.
Yep. Paul Glenn is a good friend of mine, and he's been on here, and he talks about Royce just having a level of confidence that he has yet to see ever since.
Yeah, and that's kind of where that's kind of what, that was the mindset. I remember going in there in high school and lifting a couple times, and him yelling and hollering in the weight room, yelling Big Ten, big time, and just like that confidence, and that rubbed off on other people. And I think one of the reasons Iowa would elevate their program not only was Gable, but there were certain guys in the program that would elevate it, and certain leaders of his that were just so intense, so tough that they elevated those around them. I think he was one of them. I remember I brought this up to Coach Gable once, and I named off 4 or 5 guys, and he said, yeah, and he named off one other guy. I think he said Mike Deanna, which was before my time, but how those guys would bring something to the table that would elevate all those around them. Kind of like a Clayton Rush, he came in, and his mindset was to win the national title as a freshman, and he about did it.
Well, and the Steiners too, right? I mean, the Brains were there, and they're the twins, so they get a little more press. But Lincoln McElravy says the Steiners had a work ethic you literally could not believe.
Oh yeah, no, they were literally they would do 3-a-days, except on Sunday because they'd always go to church on Sunday. Otherwise, they would do 3-a-days. They would come in and hit. They'd lift in the morning. We'd do a practice. They would come in and drill their outside single or their legs every single night of the week. And I don't think anybody put in more time than them. Those guys put in the most time. I think the Brands were probably they were the most intense. But yeah, and that's when I came in as a freshman, I had guys like the Brands to look up to. And you just benefit from being in that environment.
Well, and McElravy says he did what the Steiners did his first year, and even into his second year, but after that, he just couldn't do it anymore, so he had to back off. But like those guys were doing that 3-a-days all the time. Oh, yeah,
and that just goes back to the mind, the capacity of their mind to do that. There's not many people that could do 3-a-days long-term without getting burnout and they could do it, and they did it, and they made themselves both national champs by doing it.
Well, not to mention the mental toughness of Troy to his senior year. He's a defending national champ, undefeated, cut down a weight class to let McElravy into the lineup so they could win another team title. Like, that's just how mentally tough that guy was.
Yeah, and he got beat. The guy that he got beat by is one of the best wrestlers in the history of America, Kolat. Yeah, people don't realize how, maybe they do, but Troy Steiner was I think he took 6 his freshman year, and he dominated his junior year at 141. He could have stayed up and dominated that weight class, but he went down to 30, I think 34 it was, with to wrestle that year to let Lincoln in the lineup.
It's just unheard of to think of like a Brett Metcalf, his senior year in February, cutting down to 141. Like you wouldn't even think of it nowadays, but that Gable just had this way about him, I guess. I don't know. You would know.
Yep. No, he pushed all the right buttons.
And last thing, coaches, we always sign off with this, and it's been unbelievable to talk to you, and I hope to chat with you again as the season gets going, kind of as a midway review. But as you sign off here for this first one, how would you say wrestling's changed your life, and what's been like the lasting impact for you?
Well, it changed it from one standpoint of that I'm making my living in wrestling, and I feel fortunate to be a and be able to work with the athletes, the type of athletes, the high-level athletes I get to. It's an incredibly rewarding job. But probably the thing I think about, and I think about this, I think about what if I would have went right into football and not have had Coach Gable as my coach in the Iowa program to I guess, mold me. And I just think being around him in that environment, you become more active in your future, meaning you don't sit back and wait and see what happens. You feel like you can dictate the future by how you prepare yourself or how you attack the day or how you look at things in front of you. It's a mindset. And I feel fortunate to be around Coach Gable because even though, I tell you stories about him or you hear stories about him, it's different than being around. To be able to be around him and just for 5 years, basically every day, it's just a different way you approach things and look at things. Or I feel fortunate. I know there's other great motivators out there, but I feel fortunate to be able to be around someone like him and have him coach me for 4 or 5 years.
To be around the guy like that every day, he just rubs off on you in ways that you can't even, it's not even like a conscious thing. It just happens. And before you know it, you're starting to emulate certain things he does. So, man, it's so cool to hear you talk about those stories. And thank you so much for coming on, Coach. We appreciate it.
Hey, you betcha, Ryan. Thank you.
That's the end of this episode, but definitely not the end of the show. For more episodes, please go to wrestlingchangemylife.org. Subscribe to us on iTunes. Give us a star rating. Show the love, baby. Show the love. Thank you so much. We'll see you again soon. Peace.